Senator Murphy, let's just talk about this resolution submitted Wednesday that would tie US security assistance to a report on Saudi human rights. Is your aim through this law to stop US security assistance altogether for Saudi Arabia?
We already have a law on the book that does not allow U.S. security assistance to go to countries that don't respect basic human rights. We have waived that requirement repeatedly for Saudi Arabia, and I think it's come at great cost to our country. I think the world watches when we continue to be very cozy with brutal dictators like Mohammed bin Salman or President al-Sisi in Egypt. It makes it very hard for us to press the case for democracy and human rights around the world when we are selling record levels of arms to these countries. So I'm not suggesting that we cut off arms sales. What I'm suggesting is that we raise the bar in terms of what we expect from the Saudis. I don't think that it's unrealistic that they would meet that bar if we were just a little bit more serious about expecting human rights progress in exchange for the security relationship.
Yeah, it is. It's quite an archaic legislation, that, isn't it? I mean, it's back from 1961. You've been a very vocal critic of Saudi Arabia now for some time. I want to get your sense of where you believe the kingdom is at present, because certainly the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken this week has said that the United States, and I quote him here, welcomes anything that can help reduce tensions, avoid conflict, and curb in any way dangerous or destabilizing actions by Iran. He was alluding to the Chinese brokered Saudi-Iran deal. You were not as welcoming of that deal. I just wonder where your disconnect is with the Secretary of State.
Well, I don't necessarily think there's a disconnect. I actually think that it's probably a good thing for the region, and if there's less conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia, that's a good thing for the United States. And I think we need to ask questions about what the underlying commitments are in that agreement. And the tweet you referenced was just, I think my effort to point out that one of the reasons that Saudi Arabia is drawing closer to China is that China just doesn't give them a very hard time when it comes to their human rights record, and in fact gives them technology, as they do to other countries, that facilitates that campaign of repression. So we should just be eyes wide open when we think about why Saudi Arabia may be drawing closer to China. It's because China doesn't come with any values asks.
The kingdom would argue that they do business with the Chinese and they are close to the Chinese because China is their biggest customer. Should that not be part of the thinking here?
Well, there's no doubt that there's an important economic relationship between Saudi Arabia and China. If you look 10 years down the road, oil produced in the Middle East is going to matter much more to China than it will to the United States. And it's an interesting situation we have today in which China essentially is a free rider on U.S. security guarantees in the Gulf. The United States spends most of the money to secure oil deposits, exploration, and transport. China gets more of that benefit today than the United States does. So I don't know that it is completely out of bounds for China to be expected to pick up a little bit more of the cost when it comes to securing a product that over the next 2 decades is going to matter much more to China than it will to the United States.
You are still, though, very mindful about the oil production from this region. I want to take us back to October of 2022, after OPEC Plus cut oil production. You said at the time that the US needed a wholesale evaluation of its relationship with the kingdom, as did President Joe Biden at the time. At the time, I interviewed the Saudi ambassador to the US, Princess Rima, following that decision. Many in the US, and I think I would be right in including you, accused the Saudis of that being a political decision. Here's what she told me at the time.
Many people have tried to politicize this, but you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. This is not political. This is purely economic, based on the expertise of 40 or 50 years of mapping and trends. We do not engage in the politics of anyone. We engage simply as a balancer and a stabilizer of the economy through the energy market.
She said straight from the horse's mouth, you're hearing it here. This was not a political decision. She went on to talk about how important it was to the kingdom that it had a good relationship with the United States of America. Do you still want a wholesale reset? Do you believe that the US shouldn't do business with Saudi?
Well, I certainly believe that we should have a reevaluation of the relationship, and I have a great deal of respect for the ambassador. I engage with her regularly, but I just think it's completely wrong to believe you can separate energy policy from national security policy. They are deeply intertwined. Russia does not separate the two, and frankly, Saudi Arabia has never separated the two. Saudi Arabia has used its energy resources in order to build up its national security and foreign policy credibility around the world. So this notion that we should only make decisions about energy policy based on how much money we make belies the fact that it is energy policy that determines as to whether Russia can continue its illegal, brutal campaign in Ukraine. So I just don't think you can separate the two. I think it's disingenuous to suggest that you can make a decision on oil without any regard for the national security implications.
With the greatest of respect, that decision was made just before the midterms, and my sense is that, and I want to provide the context here, the ambassador was certainly speaking to the fact that the Saudis didn't want to get involved in a political situation around those midterms, and this was at a time when gas prices were high in the US, and that was hurting Joe Biden and the Democrats. Look.